Everyone is welcome here. It's time to make new friends. Fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton.
Slancha. And good day, Whiskey brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to the Whiskey Book Club's 7th book of Season 6 with Davin de Kergamo, the author of this book right here, Canadian Whiskey, and not just that, the essential portable expert. So, as always, I'm honored to have you, the viewer, with us as well today. Now, there's other whiskey book clubs out there now, but none that delve so deeply in the matter with the subject matter with the author and friends than right here. So my name's Dolph. I'm the founder of the Whiskey Book Club. I'm president of the Alberta Scotch Society. Most importantly, I'm your host tonight. So for those of you new to the Whiskey Book Club, I'll explain a little bit of what we're about. It's a home base. It is a safe place for whiskey geeks like you and me that love to share a dram and share a passion for reading, mostly about whiskey-related activities. So this book, and I'll show it again, is the 27th book reviewed on the Whiskey Book Club. Good looking book. And quite possibly, I'm here with Davin. He is, not quite possibly, he is the biggest proponent of Canadian whiskey. He's the world leading authority on Canadian whiskey. He has contributed to, co-authored 8 other books. He is an editor, or was an editor, of Whiskey Magazine, has authored too many articles to count. And I'm a math teacher, so that's saying something. And he's recently inducted to the WDA World Drinks Awards Hall of Fame. And he's here with us today. Now, welcome, everybody. I'm Dolph. That's Davin over there. Sorry, I got to get my fingers right over here. And
how you doing?
Doing well. I'm going to tell people what I have in my glass tonight because I know that you probably have water. You like to have water and you don't drink so much when you're on this. So this is one glass in there. And this other glass is kind of important. So this is the glass. We're going to talk about this glass a bit later, and that's what I have in there. So we got 100% rye and we got 100% corn with the Century 21. And welcome. I got to take a breath. I was
wondering if you ever going to
just talk, and I just try to get everything out in 1 second. So I learned to calm down. Well, yeah. My wife tells me that all the time. Let's start this off right off. Davin, and I got to get my quotes ready because I got a lot of quotes here throughout, and you know that of me. So Davin, your book dedication in this book. Your book dedication in this book, and we're going to compare it to this one over here, if that's okay. So it's a great analogy for the comparison between edition 2 and 3, starting right with the dedication. So this one right here, for Janet with love and appreciation, exactly the same in both of them. However,
I love Janet and I still appreciate her.
Perfect. Well, and the other one for Ronan, but most of like the second part of the dedication has changed from this to this. Now, this is what this one said, to Ronan with patience and anticipation, whereas now it's to Ronan and Seneca. Now, it was reworked, reorganized, and updated, and it felt like one of those renovation shows where the owner comes home. They're coming to their home, but it's completely updated. Still home, just better. So how did you feel from your end as the engineer? You were the architect going from this much loved book, and you spent a lot of time promoting this and writing this to go into this. So how do you feel as the engineer to this one?
Well, I think, renovations, a pretty dramatic overhaul, but there's also like a huge addition put on as well. So the basic structure is the same. Well, the structure is similar for most whiskey books do things a certain way, and I think this one is very different. In fact, it's so different that I told the publisher I'd like to have a different title for it, but they seem to think that we would be better if we just continued on calling this a third edition. And I think that in some ways it almost misrepresents it, because the book is really, it's been reworked from one end to the other. Has some things they're deleted, and a lot of new history is added, and a lot of new historical distilleries are added. So more than a dozen new distilleries we looked at in depth, and all the tasting notes are new. And but in any case, nevertheless, I'm delighted with the way it turned out. I think it's the best thing I've ever done.
Okay. Was this a labor of love, or was this something that was hard and you're just glad it's over, but really happy with the end result?
Well, I'm really happy with the way it turned out, but it was a labor of love, or it was something I truly enjoyed doing. It was like I was working 7 days a week on this, and I was working like 14-hour days. I really enjoyed it. It's writing the book is like, it's the best part of having a book is the research and the writing. It really is. The book comes out, and that's like a record of what you've done. But I love learning, and it really it was a lot of fun. There was no point where it was really, I just wish it was over.
Good. Well, that's good, especially in the month. How much time would you say you did this, the 14-hour days for, do you think?
Oh, well, it's hard to say. 8 months or so. I mean, I spent more than a year writing it, but
Okay.
but those long days, once I got into it, I got up in the morning with all kinds of ideas and went straight back to it. It was a full-time job, and a lot of other things got neglected because of it, including my social media.
That's okay. That's all right. You got people taking care of that now. There's a sound in the background. Sounds like your dog's tap dancing or something.
Well, you know what it is? It's raining.
Oh, okay.
And the rain is falling on our skylights.
That's okay. Well,
Do you want me to move to another room?
yeah, no. I thought you were going to say move to another city. I want you to teleport somewhere else. No, we're good. But we're still going to talk about the reorganization just a little bit. So an example of the reorganization would be something like Chapter 5 in here, now called Maturing, whereas a lot of the information that was previously in Chapter 3, in this book, The Wood, is in there now. Now, a more specific example of this sentence is when you talked about Canadian Club. And I remember that section when we read the book initially, because I loved it. And it was a little bit pointed in how Canadians were a little bit opposed in the States, and we came up on top. So I remembered that chapter really well. And here's the quote. And this one's new. So, despite considerable research, no documented evidence of an actual petition or the resulting regulations has ever been found. So this is brand new, and this interspersed with the chapters which were that chapter which was just about the same, but the wording changed just slightly. And I'm wondering, are such changes the result of you having, like, did you think of this over time since you wrote the second book, and since you had this chance you would clarify it? Or was this essentially someone else reading it and telling you, the editor, telling you that maybe we want to clarify this, or are we getting this information? Essentially what I want to know is what the editor-writer interaction was in these types of changes, where it was basically the same, but something minute in there was thrown in.
Well, okay, let me first say that I think there's a lot more change than you may notice. Because I mean, I rewrote virtually every chapter, but now of course some of them the basic facts are the same in most of them, not in all of them, but in most of them. But there were a few things I did. For example, I removed long passages, like pages and pages, that were written in the passive voice. I don't like it. The whole of the first 7 chapters, I just can't. When people are writing about whiskey, they say the grain is ground into grist, and then water is added,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to me, that becomes boring. And I had done that, but now I say, okay, I put it in the active voice. Workers grind the grain, or millers grind the grain, and then they add water, and then they add malt and things like this. It makes it more readable, it stops being a list and it becomes a process. And so I did that. The other thing is the active voice takes fewer words than the passive voice. And I was really pressed for words because, I had so much new material to add. I really did. I mean, we had to add, 32 more pages, but I also wanted to, to be more succinct in how I express things. Now, as far as that chapter on wood, I never liked that chapter on wood. I thought that I kind of allowed myself to be, restricted by the outline, and I thought that chapter on wood, it didn't really fly that well. So merging that with maturing, suddenly it seemed like a whole chapter, So that's why I did that. Now, I think that people have some false idea that there's some editor out there directing authors of what to write.
Yep.
That's just not the way it works. The editor responds to what we write, but it's always with, I didn't really understand this, or I didn't get this, or I didn't, or something like that. And but they don't say, you should address this, or you should address this. They don't do that. It's really, at least with history books, or at least with books like mine, and I've worked with 4 different authors on this kind of book. It's really more them just trying to ask you, do you think you explained this well enough, or things like that. But there's nobody up there. There's not this brilliant author or editor who's sitting there deciding it. I mean, it's up to me what gets in and what doesn't. And if I disagree on something that they think isn't right, it's my call in the end.
Nice.
So that's the way it was. So I have a brilliant editor who read it and found all kinds of things in there. She said, like, did you mean this or did you mean this? And so then I would go back and rewrite it so it was pretty clear what I meant. Things like that. But there's not this big bank of professionals who sit there and make the book. Well, there is in vanity publishing for sure, but not in professional publishing, no.
Good. And would it be like that for a new author, do you think? Or is it just because you have the experience and they trust you?
Okay. When I wrote my first book, my author was Philip Rappaport.
Okay.
And he reviewed the outline. And then I decided to move forward. He didn't comment on the outline. He just reviewed it to see that it kind of made sense. Well, this is like from 36,000 feet,
okay.
Big, and it seemed to logically flow in 5 pieces. And that was as far as it went. And then when I started writing the book, I said, do you want to see progress? And he said, no. And then when I sent that first manuscript into him, that was the first time he'd read it. Mm-hmm. He came back with only one comment, and he said, well, you've certainly covered the waterfront on this, but that a book this long, we're going to have to charge a lot of money for, and it's going to cost you sales. He said, I would suggest, I had 115,000 words. He said, I would suggest you cut out 40,000 words. Okay. That was his comment.
Or 1/3 off. Yeah.
A little bit less than a third that it cut out. And you know what? That was such brilliant advice for him to give me. Because first of all, it did bring it down to a price where people would buy it without thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And it also, I found so many places where I had used, crazy locutions, the reason for that is instead of because, or where I had really duplicated things. I'd said something here and then I'd said it again later and things like that. Once I cut all that out, you know what? It just was not, it was not. I didn't lose anything by cutting out those 40,000 words.
Okay.
That was a great experience, and I think that Philip enjoyed it as well, because even now, like, more than 15 years later, he still keeps in touch when he sees that I'm doing a book or working with somebody on a book or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's nice to know. There's some good people out there, Davin.
Yeah, there are.
And you've met a lot of them in your line. It's good.
Yeah. But, you're working with professionals. I mean, and they expect me to be a professional as well. I have to say that working with Dorling Kinderly or places like that, what I'll do is they'll say, you have this many words. You can say whatever you want, organize it, but you have this many words. And then when you get when they send back the proof, there are lines on the page. Anything outside the line doesn't get printed. And so your choice is to either allow them to truncate it or you rework it so it fits in the space. And that's the way it is.
Okay. Well, the business end still has to be the business end.
Yeah.
You made a point of keeping a lot of the visuals, which I like a lot. So let's just start with the front. So two different maps. So traditional and lost distilleries. And on the back side, we have the other ones, which is the artisanal distilleries. So I like that. But within this, it's a beautiful book, Davin. So the pictures, just like the last time, and the pictures of the bottles and all the examples and the tasting notes you had, and I just like it. It looks like a lot of time was spent on this. The flavor wheel, which is kind of nice. So Reece Sims flavor wheel that you put in there. So I'm sure Reece really loved that. So.
Well, you know what? It took me 6 months to get that out of her.
Really?
I mean, it's not. She said yes immediately, but then it took her so long to find the file and all this stuff. I think that's what. Yeah. I really like that. I think I think the flavor wheel is so useful for people who are learning about whiskey, and you can really make it. It has to be done right. You can put too much information. Like if you look at Nancy Fraley's flavor wheel, there are like 5 rings on it. From 2012, and it's great for people who are craft distillers making whiskey, but for someone learning about whiskey, you want to keep it simple. And Reece did a brilliant job of that.
She does, and she's doing a flavor camp now, and she's taking that on the road. She's been here to Edmonton and across BC and Alberta. I'm not sure if she's gone outside of Alberta though, anywhere east of that, but it's great. But anyway, so you've included that. Let's go back to one other element in your writing process. So I personally, when reading books, not just yours, I focus a lot on the opening paragraph, the segues, and the concluding paragraph. I find them really informative in relation to content and style of the person. It kind of differentiates one author from the other, not just the body, but specifically those for me. And I really like yours. And I find that you give a lot of your pointed comments, the things where you want to make your statement in those parts. So I'm wondering, how much do you focus or rework these types of paragraphs or the segues, or is that kind of a natural thing for you?
Well, I think it's become kind of second nature to do an introduction, which could be 1, 2, or 3 paragraphs that kind of, and then you tell the story. I mean, there's the old saying, you tell them what you're going to say, then you say it, then you tell them what you said, and that's how you get people to understand what you're doing. The end of the chapter is very often, I just kind of leave it hanging and then go back after I've written the next chapter. Then I go back to the chapter before and try to make that chapter flow naturally into the next chapter, so that it's not a novel, but so that it's kind of like a story. I do that. Now I can say, and a lot of people agree with me that it's, I don't know why that. A lot of people agree with me that the first draft of anything is always horrible. It's terrible. You have to rewrite it, and you have to rewrite it, and you have to kind of make the sentences flow. And there are things that you get, like, you have to kind of get the thoughts together. And so yes, it's important to keep reworking it and keep reworking it. And what I'll do is, I mean, when I'm doing a chapter, I'll I'll keep revising it until I don't even change one word. I can read the whole thing from beginning to end, and there's nothing I see nothing that needs to be changed. But then, I'm sorry about the noise. It's Janet's making dinner for the dog, and our dog is honest. I'm not kidding you. He's the most important member of our family.
Well,
Julie, you must
it's
know.
either that or the squeaking. So it's one of it. I'm okay. We're all good.
Anyway, and then I put it away and I don't look at it for like maybe a month or something like that. And then I go back and I see all kinds of things that are wrong. They just like, you come to a word and it doesn't fit with another word. And sometimes you have to put the words in the right order, because sometimes, if you have a 2-syllable word and then another 2-syllable word, it doesn't work. And sometimes it really works well, So there are things like that, So you have to get it so that it reads naturally, and the best way to do that is to read it out loud.
Yeah,
and you read it because when you're reading it out loud, and I read loud when I'm reading it out loud. You come to things that like you just kind of trip over it. Your tongue doesn't want to say this word and then this word. Yep. Excuse me. So I'd say that rewriting is the most important part of it. You do it over and over, and sometimes you have to cut sections. Oh, for Christ's sake! I'm sorry about this. Sometimes I'm sorry, everything's coming down today. Sometimes you have to cut things that you really spend a lot of time working on, but you say, you know what, that just doesn't work here. And so maybe you move it someplace else, or maybe you just save the file under a new name and continue working from there so that you don't totally lose it. I've got lots of drafts that I'll never read them again, but I got cut something that it was painful to cut, and so I just saved it under a new name and moved on.
Well, you spend so much time and attention on it. Maybe it comes out in an article that you're going to do later, and it's like that's a perfect spot for it.
Yeah, I do recycle stuff.
Right. Well, we haven't discussed the kind of pointed parts, and I'm going to give you some examples later of where things are not really pointed. But this is an example, but it's not an introduction or conclusion. It's still quite pointed, and it's a very long quote. So bear with me, Davin, if you can. All right.
You bear with me. I'm sorry that my house is so noisy today. It's not usually like this.
It's an active place. It's a good thing, Davin. All right, here we go. Many of today's misunderstandings began as hypotheses based on limited information and passed on innocently. Most brands tell their story honestly, or at least try to. Yet even in today's age of authenticity, a few vested interests have usurped the role of historians, messaging, embellishing, or just plain inventing hagiographic stories to reflect well on specific brands or styles of whiskey. Sometimes people fill in gaps so that their stories conform with popular cliche. Other times, they leave out inconvenient facts to bolster a desired conclusion and not let the truth get in the way of a good story or sale. And that's the introduction. So, page X111, 13 of that. So this is a very pointed introduction. So can you give me a specific example of inventing hagiographic? And for those out there, hagiographic, inventing a biography to falsely venerate, bring up a person in stories. Can you give me a specific one, please, sir?
Of hagiography?
Yeah,
I can. There's this, that, no, how do I put this? The idea that there are Canadian whiskey barons is absolutely absurd. It is embarrassing. The great whiskey barons of England were actually barons. They were part of the aristocracy, and they had the rank of baron in the aristocracy. You know how it goes. There's a baron is one step below a count, okay? And there were at least 5 of them who were actual baron, like the Dewar and Walker and Haig. Maybe I can't remember Haig. Some people like this, but it just to kind of make some of these early Canadian whiskey makers to enhance their prestige, one of the brands has taken to calling just the ones that founded their whiskeys barons. And it's embarrassing because these guys never achieved the kind of success that the real whiskey barons of Scotland did. And they never achieved the kind of success that the barons of industry of America did. I mean, guys like JP Morgan and the Rothschilds and, Vanderbilts, and they never achieved it. The only one who would really qualify would be Samuel Bronfman. He had that great massive headquarters, huge, on some of the most expensive real estate in New York City, and it was a massive high-rise tower. He had like $12 million paintings hanging on the walls in his restaurant. Things like
what happens when you let your daughter design it, I think.
Yeah, well, I've met his daughter, and she's really quite sharp.
Nice.
And yeah, I think they all were very intelligent, but it's just embarrassing, and this is only done to enhance the prestige of the people who they claim as the progenitors of the whiskey they're making today. It's just embarrassing because these guys, they're like little weak, like they maybe qualify as the fleas on these guys, on the real baron's dogs, but that's about as good as it gets. But it's just like it's just the way they're trying to make everything seem better than it is and bigger than it is. And the story of Canadian whiskey is so exciting. You don't have to make shit up. But this is just a way of making, we are the heirs to the great barons of whiskey. Horseshit. You're not. Anyway, sorry. I know this show doesn't like swearing, so I apologize.
No, we're fine with that, and horse shit is perfect. And anything you want to say, you go right ahead. I've got my little banner that was up there saying you have to be 19 plus to watch this, so you do whatever you want. You're good.
Okay, good.
All right. And my next question, I have a couple like this where you seem to have pet peeves and you're telling people the truth. And we'll say it's your truth. And since we agree that you're the quintessential Canadian whiskey guru, we're gonna believe you. So, but I'm gonna add another quote. And this is one of your big ones. This is one of your big pet peeves. I've heard you talk about it a lot. So here we go. Misconceptions arise. So to be clear, despite fervent assertions to the contrary, Canada does not have the most flexible regulations of major whiskey producing countries. The 9.09% rule was intended to take advantage of U.S. tax incentives, not to help blenders improve mundane whiskey. And grain neutral spirit is not permitted in Canada. So that's on page 55. Now, I've heard you talk about the 111 rule a lot. And I've read your books, I've read the articles, but people, even those that have already done the same, like me, should give Chapter 6, blending, a proper look. Now, can you, and I'd like you to do this again, shed a little bit of light on what may be, and I don't know if this is your biggest pet peeve, but this is right up there. Shed a little bit of light on that for us.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I can hear you. We're all good.
First of all, you say this is my truth. That makes it kind of equivalent to other people's truths. And let me say that I have spent more than 25 years really studying whiskey and more than 15 years really studying Canadian whiskey. And I'm still the only person in the world who writes regularly and knowledgeably about Canadian whiskey. So social relativism is popular in school these days. But what I'm telling you is based on study, and it's just not my opinion that I come up with. I didn't just read three things and then come up with this, which a lot of other people who are out there mouthing off about Canadian whiskey, you can see it's the first thing that they just read or they saw on a chat board. Okay.
Excellent.
Now, okay. Now, yeah. Now, I'm sorry, I forgot the question, Dolph.
All right. No, the 911, 9.09, the 111 rule. Davin.
Okay, well, I guess I have to wonder why, if the Scottish can make great whiskey without adding wine to it, if the Irish can make great whiskey without adding wine, if Americans can make great bourbon without adding, Why is it some Canadian blenders feel they always have to finish their whiskeys? They always have to add rum or port or something like this. Is it because they're using this flavoring so they can sell inferior whiskey and you add the flavor from wine or something rather than develop it in the barrel? It strikes me, and I think that it has done colossal harm to Canadian whiskey, the reputation of Canadian whiskey globally. We had a bad reputation when I got started, and gradually through education, and this is education meant to talk about whiskey, not to sell a certain brand.
Right.
We got people to taste it and try the good stuff, and real connoisseurs were starting to say good things about our whiskey. And then we get somebody coming along saying, oh, the 9.9% rule, it makes Canada the most flexible whiskey. And this is idiocy. When somebody says something like that, it tells me two things. They don't understand the American regulations, which are way more wide open than ours, and they've never tasted the range of American whiskey, or else they're incapable of tasting the range of American whiskey. Is it getting too noisy here?
Nope. I can still hear you. You're all good.
So this business of using the 9.9% rule and bragging about it like it's a good thing is really harmful. And there are two things that are even worse about this. Number one, a lot of the craft distillers who've come along have come to think this is the Canadian way, and they're starting to do the same thing. And I'm telling you, it's going to end in tears. It really is. Already, our whiskey, the reputation of Canadian whiskey is beginning to plummet again. I was at Whisky Live. People who were saying good things about whiskey a few years ago, they now say they've been exposed to this, bottle cocktails that are called. They would only be defined as whiskey in Canada under Canadian law. If you made whiskey that way in Scotland, Ireland, America, well, maybe not America, but other places, you would not be able to write the word whiskey on the label. But because technically they can do it in Canada and put whiskey on the label, they really are. It's insulting to real connoisseurs, and they understand it, and they're starting to trash our whiskey again, and this is going to hurt us, especially now that there's a downturn in whiskey sales. Believe me, we can't afford to lose the ground that we've made in the last 20 years, and we've already begun to lose it. And the problem is that, you have people who are not really whiskey people running some of these whiskey programs, and they just don't have the depth of knowledge to understand that they're really doing damage to Canadian whiskey. And now my job is to record what's happening, to write about it, to criticize people based on years of knowledge and understanding and tasting thousands of whiskeys, not just Canadian whiskey, but American, Scotch, Irish, Japanese, all over. To give honest criticism, not just be nice to everybody, but to say, people need to hear about the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. Now on Instagram, I don't say anything about shitty whiskey because what's the point? And I know that the people don't read bad reviews. There's a group of people that do, but most people don't, and it's not helpful to do that. But when you're really writing as a critic, you have to mention everybody, and you have to say, you have to tell the truth about them. The other thing about the 9.9% rule that I think is absolutely despicable what they're doing, is you can, in the 9.09, and I had somebody from one of the distilleries tell me about this, that they do this, in the 9.09, you can include whiskey, okay? You can include very young whiskey. So you can put an age statement on a bottle, that says 39 years old. Okay. It could be 39-year-old base whiskey with 4, 5, 6-year-old rye added into 9.09%, and they don't count it. They don't have to count that in the age. So when somebody says that I've just released a brand new 39-year-old whiskey, say, did you use the 9.09? Was there any whiskey in the 9.09? Is every drop of alcohol in that bottle 39 years old? And if they're honest, sometimes they're going to have to say no. And I can tell you a whiskey that really pulled it off was that Canadian Club. It did a good job that did 100% of all the alcohol in the Canadian Club 45-year-old was 45 years old. That's because they've got a really brilliant blender who understands that whiskey has to be whiskey. It has to taste like whiskey. And if you say it's 45 years, it has to be 45 years old. So I'm telling you, you're drinking whiskey with age statements on it that is not as old. If it was made in Scotland, it would be called 6-year-old whiskey.
So is this all 21-year-old? Because it's 100% corn. But if they're following your rule, they didn't have to say that, right?
That is 100% 21-year-old whiskey. That's a good one.
That's a good one. You know what? And there's other whiskeys that you and I have enjoyed, though. And they have used that rule. So let's go back to, they don't make it anymore, but Dark Horse. Let's say
I'm not saying it's not flavorful. What I'm saying is it wouldn't be whiskey anywhere if it was made anywhere other than Canada.
Okay.
But yes, I'm not saying they don't taste good. All I'm saying is don't try to pass them off as whiskey. Dark Horse was a different case because, you know, it was 91% rye. And then the rest they added in some sherry.
I think it was
perfectly allowed under the 9.9, and I think they added in some was it Heaven Hill, some bourbon.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yes,
I just remember I loved it. I thought it was a great $35 whiskey when it was a whiskey that was available.
Yeah, it was a great whiskey, but you know, they didn't try to pretend that it was anything else. They right from the start they said this contains sherry and this contains bourbon. They didn't. You see, the thing is, just letting people assume that it's something that it's not is a form of dishonesty.
I agree.
Yeah, yep. It really is. You know. Anyways, yeah. So yeah, the 9.9, it was never intended to flavor whiskey. I know a guy who was in the lab when they introduced the 9.09. He's still alive. He's just about 100. And he said, you know what they would do after they had blended in the American spirit so they could get the tax advantage, they would test against the standard until it tasted exactly the same as the Canadian version.
Okay.
And they didn't change the flavor. They changed the components until it tasted exactly like the Canadian version, and they just used that. And that's the way it was intended to be used. But you get lawyers figuring, and you get accountants figuring how we can save money. You know, base whiskey is a lot cheaper to make than flavoring whiskey, and then you get people who really don't understand whiskey, don't understand how this just simply revolts the connoisseurs who know, you know, they think, you know, that if you say it's whiskey, that it's all going to be whiskey. And, and if it's not, you should tell them. They don't mind if you tell them. But it's done so much damage to the reputation of Canadian whiskey just in the last, 5 or 6 years. I think it might have set us back another 20 years.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. Like when I talk to my friends, like in Europe and in Great Britain, and it's there's no defense. There's just no defense, except we have idiots running our programs now, our whiskey programs. People who just don't have the depth of knowledge to make intelligent decisions.
Or long-lasting ones. Maybe the dollar amount that they're going to get right now is more important than what's going to happen in 10 years.
That's
That'll be
exactly
someone else's problem, right?
People working on this year's bonus.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna change to another pet peeve, and you did a really good job with the GNS. So grain neutral spirits myth. And here's another quote. So as per the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, blenders in the U.S. may routinely add up to 80% unaged neutral spirits to blends labeled as American whiskey. So too can they augment the flavor of some bourbon. So this is the part that really surprised me. So blended whiskey and some other whiskeys with up to 2.5% of anything that's not harmful, including 0.1% of ultra-potent flavoring synthesized in flavoring laboratories, with no need to mention it on the label. So you taught me something very specific with what the U.S. can do with bourbon. So I was looking at that. How likely is it that they use the 2.5% or the 0.1% of the ultra potent flavorings? And do you bring this up as something to counter the Canadian most flexible argument? So if they're going to bring up that argument, you can bring up this, or is this something in its own a really big pet peeve for you?
No, it's not a pet peeve for me.
Okay.
I don't know bourbon well enough to say whether they do that or not.
Okay.
No, that's not true. I know American whiskey well enough to know that they do that. And I did a seminar at Tales of the Cocktail quite a few years ago about the variability of American whiskey. And I tasted a lot of different whiskeys, not just bourbon and rye, but all kinds of whiskeys. And I can tell you, some of them tasted pretty artificial. And yeah, I can be sure that in some cases they are using flavoring, and they can add like orange juice or anything that's not harmful. Really, in Canada, we can only add mature spirits or wine,
Right?
But they can add anything. I mean, they can pour in agave juice or maple syrup or orange juice or who knows what in there, just to make the flavor. Now, most of the brands that are popular don't do that, but I don't know enough to say that none of them do. But I have tasted enough, and I've talked to people in the business enough to know that sometimes, yes, they take advantage of that. I mean, that's one way they add Canadian whiskey to American bourbon. They add Canadian whiskey.
And the 40-year-old, they can add some really cool stuff. But the people I'm thinking about was Little Book, who did that with, I think it was 42-year-old Canadian Club, I think they put in there. But they say that. They throw that on the label because they're pretty, well, it's special saying you have a 42-year-old whiskey in there. But,
yeah.
I just want to say hi to Whiskey Neighbor. He's on there. He wanted to say hi to you as well. So I'll just...
Hey, how you doing?
And I'll put his comment right up there. There we go. So he said, "True for bourbon, however, not for straight bourbon." With so many, yeah.
Okay, let's not get into the nitty gritty. You buy straight bourbon or buy bottled and bond, it's good.
It's good. And stick with those, and you're fine.
Yeah,
I agree completely. And he says, "Cheers back." So cheers, sir. So not a pet peeve. It's just information that you're kind of putting out there, but it's something.
But I put it in there because it's the people who are saying that Canadian whiskey is the most flexible, they don't know this, and so and people out there believe these things, because these people are so credible, and they believe these things, and so I thought I'd put that in there so the next time some idiot says it's the most flexible or it's the most variable or whatever, they can say, but what about American whiskey? They can do this, we can't. They can do this, we can't. It just amazes me that people they jump to conclusions so quickly, and then their mouths just start yapping.
Yep. And you know what? You covered this as well when you were on Sip of Knowledge with Lou Bryson, and this was during the first year of COVID. So maybe you don't remember, but you address this really well then, and I liked it. So I'm glad I read it here again. Made me happy.
Okay.
So here he says, "Love your book and all your history," and then his final comment.
Did I say something that might have offended him?
No, not at all.
Thanks very much for your comments. Thank you for your comments and for your questions and for your additions.
Book and knowledge to share, and you do.
Yeah,
you're the guru of Canadian whiskey. We keep saying that, but you know what? We're going to another thing that more information that you're espousing, that you're giving us, and this was good because people know this, but not the percentage. So I'm going to go to my next little quote. If I can go on here. Oh, not quite there. Sorry. Well, maybe I don't have the quote. Forget it.
Just read it.
I'm just going to read it. So, an item from chapter 6 that bears repeating. So, and it's along these veins. So, is that taxes are the most significant expense in making whiskey. It's just one of those things that people kind of know, but I wanted to put it out there because this is important. So, I'm glad you wrote this, as I don't think people know that. So, it's the most significant. So, sure, people believe that it makes it more expensive, but I don't think they know that it over half the cost of the bottle is from taxes. I don't think they know that more than half. So people should also know that the alcohol content, those of us that like our cask strength whiskeys, it even affects it even more than that. And that in each province, it's different throughout Canada. So I'd like this part though. Could you share, and you did this when you talked about the different world wars and pre-Confederation, how much people paid, but could you share a bit more on when the whiskey companies started to pay tax and how much they were paying so very long ago? Not just that it's 51% now, but how much they were actually given that.
I know where this question is coming from, because somebody is going around saying that taxes were introduced in Canada in 1917. That is just not true. It's not true at all. A certain kind of tax was introduced in 1917, but we've been paying taxes in Canada since about 1650, since the 17th century. Okay, and but it was in 1867 that the federal government got the right to impose taxes, but we're paying taxes to the local governments, but we're also paying taxes to France and to Great Britain, and in the beginning, when Canada took over taxation, the taxes that they were imposing were mostly customs duties and excise taxes, but they were taxing the whiskey companies right from the get-go. Okay, right from the beginning, they were taxing the whiskey companies. This is not something new that happened in 1917. That was just an incident in Canada's taxation regulations. It was just an incident. And taxing individuals, for example, things like that. But the large enterprises pay taxes. Now, I know there's some confusion about this because I've had calls from people who are fact checking other people's written work, like magazines and so on, about really. The whiskey companies were paying the most taxes. Well, here's the way it was. In the beginning, the most taxes were being paid by the largest industries. And in the beginning, the first industries were the mills. The mills came first, and they made the whiskey, and they were paying the taxes. And yes, so they were paying they were the largest individual taxpayers, but they didn't pay the bulk of the taxes. There were many other sources. The fur trade, for example, is an excellent source of tax income. As individual taxpayers, they were paid. It's like, say, Elon Musk pays the most tax in the United States. Might be true, but he doesn't pay most of the tax. And so Canada would have been just fine for taxes if there were no whiskey companies. Okay, people misunderstand this. But then when other industries started coming, like the woolen mills and the railroads, especially when the railroads came here, like they just eclipsed the taxes that the whiskey companies were paying. I think it was about by the 1850s, or maybe it was a bit before that, but I don't think so, that the whiskey companies were no longer the biggest taxpayers in Canada. So they had their brief moment of glory, and then they went just back to,
just regular Joes.
Being regular Joes. They still paid a heck of a lot of taxes, and they still do. But in the grand scheme of things, they were not significant. I mean, like Gooderman, where it's paid enough tax to York that they could have a fair bit of sway with the city council, but the city would have done just fine without them. And it's the same with the federal government. So, and I think that I have not explained that well in my book. That is almost a throwaway statement And I think that there's been a lot of confusion about that. And I think I should have explained it better. And I think other people who are taking that and now using it to make it sound like their whiskey companies were the most important companies in North America, in Canada. I mean, they need to do a little bit more research, because it's what they're just trying to give more prestige to the founding companies, and it's not warranted. That yes, that we should be very proud of the kind of taxes they were paying, but this isn't because they were being good guys. This is because they were big industries.
Yeah.
We didn't start from these little wee distilleries like they did in some other places. Great big massive industries relocated to Canada or located to Canada and set up mills that became distilleries. So that's the way. This has just been so badly misreported by other people who've taken what I've read and turned it into some great, big, wonderful thing that the whiskey companies were doing in Canada. And, if there's another edition of that book, that part is going to be changed. Seriously.
That's what Laura was saying in the background. There's your 4th edition, Davin, is what she was writing. I was thinking maybe it's just an article. Maybe it's a 10, 15-page article, something you put out. Or the 4th edition works perfectly well as well. That's good. Mm-hmm. I'm going to change our trajectory just a little bit, and I'm going to return to the first chapter on the various grains, if that's all right. So I'm kind of bouncing a little bit on you. And it's great. And as a person that leads a lot of tastings like I do for me, the Spirit of Edmonton or Alberta Scotch Society, it's a great guide. Specifically for me, the wheat whiskey is a bit of a hard one. So you talked about the different grains and the different whiskeys and having kind of a quintessential one. And my question to you is, do you have a quintessential wheat whiskey, one that all the others could be compared to? And because the only thing I'm coming up with myself that I can bring this back to as kind of my base is Crown Royal's Winter Wheat. Mm-hmm. So would that work as a quintessential wheat, or do you think you could suggest something else as the perfect wheat? And I think you had, was it Masterson's as it?
Yeah, Masterson's has an all wheat whiskey.
Yeah, I think that's
100% wheat whiskey. They have a 100% barley whiskey, 100% rye, of course.
Yeah.
And
it was Masterson's 12-year-old straight wheat whiskey is the one you have. But so would that be the quintessential one? Like when you're thinking wheat whiskey and you're comparing others to it, is that the one that's kind of in the back of your mind? Because I need that baseline for myself.
I think that's the wrong baseline.
Okay.
I think that people put way, way too much emphasis on the grain. It does not contribute nearly as much as people think it does. It contributes a lot, but it contributes in many different ways because it's which variety was it grown? Was it soft wheat? Was it hard wheat? What was the growing season like that year? And the year that it was grown. How was it processed? What kind of yeast it used? You can make wheat taste like rye. You can make wheat taste like barley. You can, and they do this. I mean, like Alberta distillers, for some of their whiskeys, they buy grain as a commodity. The same brand might have more rye or less rye in it one batch, might have more corn or less corn in one batch, depending, or more barley, less barley, depending on which happened to be the least expensive that. The time they were they were purchasing the grain, So I think that people put way too much emphasis on that. I think that my favorite wheat whiskeys are from Last Mountain Distillery in Lumsden, Saskatchewan. There's again considerable variation among them, but I think that those guys have really kind of cracked the code on making wheat whiskey. They really do a good job. Now, that Masterson's wheat whiskey is excellent. There's no question about that. It's really, really great. But a winter wheat was a blend. So, it's...
okay.
But what I think is really interesting is, I was talking about how you can make different... you can make the grain taste different ways. Well, at Sons of Vancouver, they are now working on different rye flavors. And I had a theory, and it's only a theory, remember, it's not proven, that the range of flavors you could derive from rye grain could be just as broad as the range of flavors you can get in single malt Scotch. Now, see, there's a whiskey with a lot of variation of single malt Scotch. You can take 3 or 4 of them and you wouldn't even recognize them as all being the same kind of whiskey. I think you could do the same thing with rye. Well, what they're doing there is they are taking different quadrants in the whiskey wheel, and they're emphasizing those used in a 100% rye grain. And they're doing a brilliant job. They haven't decided yet if they're going to have 5 or 6 ryes, and they're going to take a few years to do it. But I poured the first one at some tastings I was doing out in Vancouver before I visited you in Edmonton. Okay. And I poured, and what they were working on that is citrus and botanical notes. Okay. And so they were making rye grain that was really for it. Some of the people tasted tangerine and some people tasted orange. I found it was more generic citrus, and the botanical notes, florals and things like that I found, but they found others. In any case, I poured this at 2 tastings and asked people what they tasted. I didn't tell them what it was. This was why. And at both tastings, people tasted citrus notes. I got less of the botanical tastes. Those guys at Sons of Vancouver have produced a rye whiskey that really emphasizes that. Now, I first noted this with Stillwater's 100% rye, which had lemon curd in it. I never heard of lemon curd. And it occurred to me, we've always been trying to make rye whiskey taste like American rye. It doesn't have to. And we used to say, there was a time, and it's not true now, that we would say, there were 3 major producers of 100% rye grain whiskey in North America. We used to say, if it tastes like dill pickles, without the vinegar, of course, tastes like dill pickles, or I guess just like dill, it comes from ADL, probably. If it tastes like grain or bread, like rye bread, it comes from Hiram Walker. Okay. And if you can taste some pink grapefruit notes in there, it comes from MGP. Okay. It comes from MGP. And of course, that's changed a little bit now. Hiram Walker has stopped using malt in their rye whiskey. They used to use rye malt. They've stopped using that. And that, of course, that changes the flavor, and it really has. And they've started using hybrid rye, which, of course, again, changes the flavor. Produces a lot more alcohol, but it changes the flavor. I'm starting to notice the dill pickle notes are starting to creep into some of the Hiram Walker whiskeys. But yeah, me too. No, actually, no. Lot 40 was it still is good. It was so.
I don't get dill pickle on Lot 40.
No, it was so wonderful when it was back in the grain days. The original Lot 40 has never been replicated. It was. Fabulous. It was really wonderful whiskey. I'm not dissing the new ones. I'm just saying they don't taste the same as the old ones, and I kind of miss that. But but I was talking to Dave Pickerel when I was at Whistlepig, and he poured me some new whiskey, and I said, "This tastes like MGP," and he said, "Yeah. We're trying to get the grapefruit notes." I said, "The grapefruit notes, that's exactly it." And then he repeated the same thing as me. Dill pickles, ADL, grain or bread, Hiram Walker, grapefruit, MGP. And I thought, my goodness, because like this guy, I mean, he's a god when it comes to rye. And he had come up with the same things that some of us have come up with. So there's so much variation you can get out of rye grain, and I just love that the Sons have started working on this, and they have very specific plans, and they've mapped it all out. We're going to get this here, we're going to get this, and they made that map by tasting their different ryes. And so they taste barrels and say, "Oh man, this one's citrus. Man, this one has a lot of citric notes. And they blend those together to emphasize those flavors. You watch. I think that this is going to be the next collectible set of whiskeys in Canada. People should go to Sons of Vancouver website and sign up, because you can never find it anywhere except on the website. Buy all 5 or 6 of them, because they're going to be worth a fortune someday.
Nice. And James Lester of Sons of Vancouver, we've been talking about ryes for quite a while, because rye's my grain. I love it. And when I was first introduced to him, I think it was 2020. It was right after COVID kind of started, we spent a lot of time, and it was the floral notes, the sweet florals that he was most interested in at that point.
Yeah.
And just telling me that rye doesn't have to be the white pepper, or it doesn't have to have that spice in the back. And I was espousing, it was Millstone 100 at that time, which was my favorite rye, which is kind of sad because it wasn't Canadian. I was telling him about it. And for me, it was the orange notes on that. And it was mandarin oranges. And it was a single barrel that they had sold to 2 different stores here in Alberta.
Yeah,
it was fantastic. It was phenomenal. I loved it. So we talked about that, and then since then we've been on the rye topic. So I agree with you. And when they had their peated rye, it just made me really happy because I'm kind of a peat head as well. So they're doing great stuff.
They're doing great stuff. I'd like to think that you had a hand in that, Dolph. Peat and rye do not go together. I mean, it really doesn't make sense. But they're the only ones who pulled it off. They and it was brilliant, that one. I think that Jenna did that one.
She's been a great addition too.
She's fabulous,
fantastic, smart as a whip too.
But I thought, like, you're taking 2 flavors. I mean, the most important thing is to get things balanced. But she tasted it regularly until it was right, and when it was right, she pulled it out because she didn't want to let it go too long. You know what I mean? And that the lot 40, it was clumsy and crude. It was like it was just slapped on with a knife afterwards or something like this. It was again, that ruins the reputation of lot 40, which has been such a great whiskey. And the dark oak is still, pardon me? The dark oak is still great. No, I thought it was really badly made. I thought it was undone. Oh, that one, yes, that one was nice. I think is that the 18-year-old?
No, this is the 12-year-old lot 40 cast strength. And I know at this point in time, you weren't really a cast strength guy. You're still giving me the gears about loving my cast strength stuff. But
I don't. There's nothing wrong with cast strength whiskey if you drink it as cast strength whiskey.
Yeah.
It's just that I think you can sell crappy whiskey at cast strength because it tastes a lot better.
Yeah. Well, you were saying I just wanted Scotch. You just want Scotch if you want the cast strength, and my delicate palate has come out a little bit more over the years as I've been listening to you and with the Canadian whiskeys.
And I want to thank Whiskey Neighbor for saying yes on the last mountain. A little while back, you had a comment about
let's click that back up there. And I as well, and we haven't made it out there. Now we've interviewed them on this, but we haven't been out there lately. And it's a group that I'd like to include on kind of the Western Canadian craft distilling kind of envelope, but we haven't really pulled them in so much. But we have to go. One last question, and then we'll wrap this up, and then we'll do our second section some weeks in the future whenever it's good for you. Sound good?
Sure, sounds good.
All right. So I need a picture with this one. So let's get the picture. Sorry, right there. See it? So you referred to glassware in the outside influences portion of chapter 8. So tackling tasting techniques, the name of the chapter. So here's a picture of what you sent me of a Canadian whiskey glass design that you told me you and a bunch of distillers developed with Glencairn quite a few years ago. So, and I've got one that's almost like that, and I'm going to show it to you in a second. Oh, here it is. So I'm going to put that there. Can you explain what elements of this glass, or that glass, yours, would accentuate Canadian whiskey specifically? Now, mine, if it was Canadian whiskey, I think it would go in a bit more here, so a little bit more bulbous and come out.
Okay. First of all, my involvement was only commenting. Okay.
Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you gave me the picture in the comments, though.
Yeah, but this was really just a promotional thing that was started by LCBO. I don't think that does anything to enhance Canadian whiskey. But I really like that glass for 2 reasons. It's big enough you can put ice in it.
Yep.
And it holds a cocktail. It's really nice. And it's good for gin and tonic, and it's great for, it's good for other drinks as well.
But you do talk about what accentuates different flavors in that chapter, though. So that's essentially where I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
When do you want the flare? When do you want it more bulbous? Type play.
Yeah. Well, I personally, I prefer an ISO glass or a genuine Glencairn.
Okay.
And the reason for that, the ISO, because it's pretty standard and you can taste anything with it, you want to focus the flavors at the top. You want a large kind of waist on it so that vapors can collect there before they go up.
Yeah.
And it gives you that. The reason I prefer a genuine Glencairn is it's made with good quality glass.
Right.
And now some
glasses say
glasses,
the Glencairn on the bottom there. That's
yeah. Some Glencairn, some glass. You know, the raw materials that glass is made of. Not all glasses are made from the same raw materials or the same proportions. Some glass is really sticky. Some glass is really slippery, and all in between.
Okay.
So the idea of looking at the legs is this: it doesn't work with whiskey. First of all, because whiskey's at 40%. Excuse me, it's at 40%. But unless you get all glasses from exactly the same batch, from the same manufacturer, because they don't always get the same glass in it for every batch, you can't really compare legs from one to another, because if you've got a sticky glass next to a slippery glass, the sticky one's going to have long legs no matter what you put in it.
Yeah.
When you get down to 14% or so, then the legs are more representative of the spirit. So that's my thoughts on glass.
All right.
You want to focus the nose, yeah. Particularly if you're adding water.
Well, I was hoping for a lot more information on the Canadian glass, that it was going to make this and make the sweetness come out more. But you know what?
Yeah, I think that it's yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up. Let's wrap that up.
Sure.
That's our last comment. So that's all the time we have this afternoon, whiskey friends. Thanks, John, whiskey neighbor, for joining us, and thanks to all our listeners. It was a fantastic afternoon for me, and hopefully it was for you too, Davin, and everyone else. Thank you again, Davin. It's been an absolute pleasure spending this time with you, and I hope you liked it as much as I did. So join us. I don't know when we're going to talk to Davin again. Maybe 2 weeks, might be 3 weeks, whenever it is. We'll get through the second half of the questions. I had 13 pages worth of questions. I got 7 done. So we're doing all right. We're doing good.
Yeah.
And I have Hans Offringa with me on June 8th. So hopefully I see you before I see Hans, and we'll wrap this up. And I'm going to see you many different times. I know I'm going to definitely see you at the Banff Whiskey Experience, but that's all the way at the end of November. So maybe I don't know. Hopefully I'll see you. No, I'm going to see you this summer. I told you I'm there. I'm in Ottawa in the first week of July. So we'll see each other then.
We might, if I'm in town.
If you're in town, that's right. You almost took off to Halifax last year.
Yeah.
Let's hope you go. Anyways, thank you all. And I'm going to raise a glass. And Davin, if you have water.
A little bit left.
You got some. Here's the good company. Here's the good whiskey, which in this case is the Century 21, and it's the Alberta Premium Cask Strength, which is fantastic. Here's the good books, and I'll show you both of them. And we're not going to poo-poo this edition. This is a fantastic edition. And if you still can see this or pick one up at the secondhand store, you should pick that up. But this is the book we're talking about now. So here's the good books. Here's the good conversation, which has happened over the last hour and a bit. And Sláinte, cheers. Hope to see you all soon.
Cheers. Robert Simon says